Hi, everybody. My name's Dr. Justin Bailey, and I'm here with another round of fun with statistics. This time, we're going to be talking about exponential numbers. People might have heard of this idea of exponential growth, but I wanted to go into it a little bit more detail. It's kind of a fun little video here where my whole point really is just that our brain doesn't think exponentially. We tend to think linearly. Our brain does amazing things and actually does a lot of mathematical computations, such as like if you threw a ball at a moving target, there's just so much math really that goes on, and we really do an amazing job. But we wouldn't be able to do that if a ball was thrown exponentially, and I hope by the end you'll see why. You might have heard of riddles that have to do with exponential numbers, and this is just one of them, but imagine a lake with one lily pad. The next day, somehow it doubles in size. There's 2 lily pads after a day, and every day those 2 become 4. And just for the sake of example, that this particular lake takes 67 days to fill up with 100% lily pads. So a couple questions. One is, on what day was the lake 50% covered in lily pads, right? So if it takes 67 days to totally fill, how long does it take to get half filled? And then working backwards from there, like how many days do you think it took to get the lake 1% filled, or to be specific, 1.5% filled? Well, I'm going to do a quick example of it, and please excuse my poor drawing here. But let's say this is our lake. It's a giant lake, and you can't even see a lily pad from here, so we're going to zoom in a little bit, zoom to the top, and go into this corner here. Let's say there's our lily pad. This is day 1. We've got 1 lily pad. Day 2, we have 2. But on day 3, we've got 4 lily pads, then 8, then 16. And if we zoom out, actually put in 54 little dots there. 64, sorry, and then 128. Again, just assuming we get to the point where it's 1.56%, here's where exponential growth really takes off. Now we've got 100% growth per day, which is pretty amazing, pretty astounding, but it does demonstrate that you can very quickly, now we're still just in a tiny percent, how many days will it take to fill from here? We're at 1.5%. You go boom, 3, 6, 12, 25, 50, and full. Again, if this is day 67, this is day 66. So the day before the final day, the lake would be half full. And again, working backwards just to kind of show that it only takes 5 days to go from 3% all the way up to 100%. Because it's 6 days from here, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and the entire lake is filled. So to go back to our riddle, what's the answer here? For 50% covered, that would be day 66, right? The day before the last day, it's half covered, and it doubles to 100%. What day was the lake 3% covered? I think that was day 62. 1% would have been day 61. Again, our brains don't think that way. Our brains tend to think linearly, and this is just hard to fathom. So you might think, okay, that's a cute little riddle. What does it have to do with real life? Well, here, this is just an amazing process of the strength of waves, the mass and force of a wave. So I was on a beach and I was learning how to surf, and the waves were about 3 feet high, which was enough to, when you get hit just the right way by a 3-foot wave, it definitely hurts. It feels like you're being tackled by a very large person. But it was kind of fun, right? I'm learning to surf, and I finally got up. So the next day I'm very excited to go surf again, and the waves were 4 feet high. And I thought, well, I handled the 3 feet waves pretty well. I'm sure it's not that big of a deal. And it was a big deal. Why? Because as the wave heights grow, the weight grows exponentially. and instead of just a couple hundred pounds worth of force, you had close to 1,000 pounds worth of force. So a 5-foot wave, a 6-foot wave, these are the size of a car. A 10-foot wave would be like hundreds of cars crashing on you. So something to consider if you've got your kids out and the waves start to pick up a little bit and you think, oh, no big deal, it's just a little bit small, a little bit larger. The exponential growth can have a huge impact. Here's a question may never have been asked before, but how many ancestors do you have? Well, obviously you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, right? You can start doing the math and work your way backwards. Let's use this example of a child born in 2000. Many of my students were born then. Well, let's say a generation is 30 years, just to make a round number, but their parents might be born in somewhere around the 1970 area. Their grandparents, if they again had kids at around age 30, we're just going to use that number as an example. You start doing the math and realize that we've got the lily pad again, right? It's 2, 4, 8. Every generation it doubles. Well, how many ancestors did you have hundreds of years ago then? How about 2,100 years ago? Well, it turns out, go ahead, stop the video and just think to yourself, but it's a larger number than you can imagine, right? It's hard to even fathom how quickly it goes from just 16 great-great-grandparents to a number that is just astronomical. So again, on the right, you can kind of see what we're talking about. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Great-great-grandparents, we have a lot of them. Well, what about 300 years ago? 400, I guess. You'd have about 1,000 ancestors. What about back in 1400? You'd actually have 1,000,000 ancestors. 1,100, by the way, every 300 years, you basically just add 3 zeros. Now we're talking about 1,000,000,000 ancestors back in just 1100, and that's AD. So I won't bother you with all the math, but it's just such a huge number. We've got 1 followed by so many zeros by the time of the building of the Roman Colosseum. We're talking about 1/6 ancestors. So it's just such a large number, it's hard to comprehend. By the way, there's only been about 100 billion people ever on the planet. So obviously the way they get to this is the fact that people are marrying other ancestors, having children with, third cousins, seventh cousins, more than you wanted to know, but they think that we're related to everybody else on Earth by about 50 cousins. So everybody is on the same tree. Interesting way to think about it. So how does this all relate to the real world? Where obviously where I'm headed with this is exponential growth of, say, virus spread. And you might have seen a graph like this before, but I think it's so critical because people kept thinking, well, everybody's going to get the coronavirus. Like, why should I bother? What's the 6 feet away, or wearing a mask, or even shutting down a company or working from home? Why do we do all these things? Well, particularly early in the coronavirus, I'm not speaking so much lately because we've gotten so many good treatments for it. It's no longer as dangerous as it was at first. But when it was first spreading in New York City and people who went to the hospital ended up dying in high numbers, it really was important to try to reduce the spread. Here's a little graph to just kind of show you that if you have every single person spreads it to 2.5 people in 5 days, then in 30 days you just have hundreds, right? And while it's true that the chances of somebody dying, even back then, was maybe 1 out of a couple hundred, I didn't want to be this person who ended up spreading it to this one person who died, right? So I really felt like it was important to go more towards here. If you could reduce the spread by a bit, by half, 1.25 instead of 2.5. 30 days later, you've still got a low number of cases. And of course, if one person doesn't spread it to more than one person on average, 10 people spread it to 6, then eventually it will disappear altogether. So what's the takeaway from this exponential? You might have seen graphs like this. The main point is that there's a slow burn, right? The very beginning parts sometimes feels very slow, but then all of a sudden things will just take off. The other major point I wanted to say about this particular video was just that our brains don't work this way, right? It's really hard to get our brain around 1/6 ancestors. We just think linearly. And finally, invest your money, right? If you can invest even at 1%, 1% growth will eventually kind of make this turn. It won't skyrocket quite the same as quickly as a 2% savings investment, or 4% or 10% would be amazing. But it is slow at first, right? So be patient and realize that there's a slow burn, but then it turns into kind of a hockey stick. That's it for part 2. I look forward to seeing you.